right, well, it's recording. It's recording me. Hello. Y'all just ignore that. You can look at it if you don't believe me. All right. Okay, everybody. So today we're going to start our next chapter, which is on the passive voice. Woo! Passive voice. So my first question for you, and I'm going to start this unit with a question. My question for you is, have you ever been taught not to use passive voice?
Yes.
Who says yes? I've got one person saying yes. Anybody else? Anybody else? Have you ever been taught not to use passive voice? Okay, just one person. That's good, actually. I'm glad that only one person said yes to that question. Okay. Sometimes I get a lot of yes answers to that. So only one person said yes. So, do you know what verb tense I used in this question?
Yeah.
What verb tense?
Present perfect. Present simple. Simple present.
Present simple. In that first question?
I have a question for you.
No. Okay, not the first question, the second question.
Oh.
Have you ever been...
Present perfect progressive. Is that question?
Progressive?
Present. Oh, in the second present simple. Present perfect. Present
Okay.
perfect.
Have you ever been taught
Present perfect. Present perfect.
present perfect?
No, that is passive voice.
Oh, yes. So this is, it's a little tricky. It's present perfect passive. So this is a present perfect passive tense.
Why?
We'll talk about that. There's a very long, at least 7-day long answer to your question,
Okay.
Abdullah. Okay. So, Alvaro, yes, you can use passive voice. You just have to be careful about when and why you use it. So I always start off by asking this question, have you ever been taught not to use passive voice? Because some teachers sometimes tell their students never to use it, but that's not correct. Please use passive voice. But you have to be careful about when and why you use it. And in this unit, we will learn how to use passive voice and when and why you should and when and why you should not use passive voice. Okay. All right. So, let's take a look at our lovely grammar book. Looks a bit larger up there.
Yeah.
Okay, so my first question for you, who wrote our grammar book?
Betty.
Betty, yes. Okay, can you answer that question in a complete sentence?
Yeah. The English grammar book was written by.
No.
In an active voice sentence.
Very cool.
So, who wrote
Betty
our...
wrote the grammar book.
Yeah, Betty wrote the grammar book. So, we've actually got two people. We've got Betty Azar and Stacy Hagen. So we've got two people here. So if I ask you this question, who wrote our grammar book? Betty Azar and Stacy Hagen wrote our grammar book.
Yeah.
What is the subject of that sentence, that answer to that question?
Okay. Betty, Azar, and
Stacy.
Yeah. They.
Yeah, Betty Azar and Stacy Hagen. So, Betty and Stacy, they did the action. They did the writing, or probably nowadays the typing, to create this book.
Yeah.
They did the work, the action. So, who did the action?
Betty and Stacy.
Betty and Stacy, exactly. Betty and Stacy. So, this is what we call active voice. You're probably thinking, that's just simple present. Now, up to now, if you didn't study passive voice before, most of what you studied probably was just active voice because we normally use active voice. If you're doing action, it's active voice. Now this is the sentence Alvaro was about to create. Our grammar book was written by Betty Azar and Stacy Hagan. This gives us the exact same information, but it switches things around a little bit. This is passive voice. What noun is in the subject position of this sentence?
The noun, the grammar book.
Yeah, suddenly our grammar book is over here in the subject position. And poor Betty and Stacy, they're in the object position. They come after the verb. They're not as important in this sentence. Because in this sentence, the focus is on the grammar book. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a couple more examples, and then I will explain why we do this and when we do this. Yeah, who invented the light bulb? Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. So here we have Thomas Edison and his light bulb. What is the subject of that sentence?
Thomas.
Or who? Thomas, yes. Thomas Edison. Who did the action in that sentence? Thomas.
Thomas Edison.
Yeah, Thomas Edison. He was the one, he and his team, actually. So Thomas was the one who did the work, created the light bulb, the reason we have light in our classroom today. And this is active voice. Okay. And here we have the light bulb was invented. Notice it switched around. The light bulb was invented by Thomas Edison. Here, what noun is in the subject position of this sentence?
Light bulb.
The light bulb, yeah.
What does it mean, light bulb?
Light bulb. What is he holding?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a light bulb.
Okay.
And this is passive voice. Okay. Let's take a look at another example.
Wait a second.
Oh, okay. Are you ready? No worries. All right. Any idea who these people are? ELI. Yeah, this is ELI teachers and students from I'm not sure what semester this was. A couple semesters ago. Several semesters ago, probably.
Who are those kids?
So this I think is Leah's son and a friend of Leah's son. Do you know Leah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some people say yes, some people say no. Okay, yeah, Leah's son. This must have been several years ago actually, because he's a lot bigger now. So there's Victoria, and there's Maya.
You.
Yeah, here do you see me?
Oh!
That's me.
Allah, it's up now. Oh,
Okay, anyway. Yeah, there's Tate. Okay, so anyway, teachers teach English at the ELI. So, what is the subject of this sentence?
Teacher.
Teacher.
Teachers. Okay. So, who does the action in that sentence?
The teachers.
The teachers! Yeah, we do all the action.
Okay.
I don't know, students do a lot of action too. Okay. So, that is active voice. But you could say, English is taught at the ELI.
Hmm.
Oh.
Okay.
English is taught at the ELI.
How about if we say English was?
Ah, well, that's past tense. Notice this is a present tense verb.
Okay.
So to keep this present tense, English is taught.
Okay.
We're going to talk about forms in a second. I just wanted to give you some examples. Of converting active voice into passive voice before we get into when and why we use it. Oh, there we go. Passive voice.
Yeah.
All right, so I have two questions up here. The first question is an active voice question, and the second question is a passive voice question. But they have the same meaning. The question, why do you think we use passive voice? Or why do you think passive voice is used? What do you think? Do you have any ideas?
The first one is active voice.
Yeah.
The second one is passive.
Yeah, but why? Why?
We use
Well,
passive voice
yeah.
to focus on the no, and
The
the
object.
object, not the object, the receiver.
Yeah, the receiver is the object.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. We use passive voice if you want to focus the attention of your sentence on the object or the receiver of the action. This would be the noun that comes after your verb. If in your active voice sentence, the thing that comes after the verb is more important to you as the speaker or the writer, maybe you might want to switch your sentence around.
Yeah, because always the noun the most important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, you do need to think about this a little
That's
bit.
okay.
Because think about that word, active voice. If there is a lot of action in your sentence, and we've talked about with action verbs, action means movement. If there's a lot of movement, a lot of action in your sentence, it does not make sense to turn it into passive voice. Passive, it's not the same as stative. You can have action in a passive sentence, because the action is being done to something. But if there's a lot of action, it sounds really strange to make that sentence passive. So this is why we say you want to limit your use of passive voice or be very careful with your use of it. Okay? And this is why sometimes, so this is why perhaps although you were told not to use it, sometimes I have found that there are some teachers who will say, just don't use it, because it's easier for some teachers to just say, don't do that, than to explain why.
Okay.
Yeah. So, the first thing to think about is we usually use it in writing, not in speaking. So it kind of sounds a little strange to use passive voice in speaking, unless, and I'll give you some examples a little later for why we use it in speaking or when we use it in speaking. But it's not that common. So it's definitely a formal writing preferred structure. And as you mentioned, it's when the object of an active voice sentence, when you want to show that it has more importance than the subject. And then sometimes I have students say, oh, but teacher, how do I know if it's more important? Well, you are the writer. You are the one who makes this decision. If you are writing an essay in your reading and writing class, or for the TOEFL or for the IELTS, or later in your graduate school program, if you realize you've written an active voice sentence, but the thing in the object position, the noun that comes after the verb, is what is most important, well, that is where you might want to switch your sentence into passive voice. Maybe put a little star by that. So again, the importance is based on your opinion. Okay, also remember, active voice. Again, active voice is all those verb tenses that you have studied up to today. So if you never studied passive voice before, then any verb tense that you already learned is active voice. It is what is most common. It's what we normally use. When you talk to your friends in English, you are using active voice. We use passive voice in writing, but typically active voice is going to be a lot more common. All right, let's look at this sentence.
Okay. Subject, verb.
This is the subject, this is the verb, and this is the object. People use passive voice in writing. The subject of this sentence is people. The verb is use, and the object, or
Passive
the
voice.
noun that comes after the verb, is passive voice. Now this is if you're talking to your friends, if they say, hey, what did you do in grammar class today? You might tell them about, oh yeah, we learned about passive voice. We learned that people use passive voice in writing. You would tell them this in active voice. But maybe you want to switch this around a little bit. Maybe?
Yeah.
All right. So passive voice is rare. So You will use passive voice. Don't be intimidated by passive voice, but you'll probably only use it in writing. Again, I will give you some examples for when you may hear, or depending on your career or future, you may use it in speech, but it's not so common. And your object is important. So we're going to take that object and move it into the subject position. So notice here what had been the object is now moved into the subject position. The verb remains the verb. We'll talk about the verb forms and how they change in a minute. Now notice I have by people, and I have it in parentheses.
Because I think it's optional.
It is optional. Yeah, passive voice is used in writing by people. So think about this sentence. Can I say passive voice is used in writing, period?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Because we have in English the most important part of any sentence, the object and the verb.
Well, here the object has become the subject. But
yeah, object and subject and the verb. So we
okay,
have subject and verb.
but
No
think
need.
about it. So passive voice is used in writing.
Yeah.
Who writes?
I don't care about who writes that.
I'll say this again.
People.
People.
Mm.
It's understood who writes. If your sentence makes sense, so here the sentence would be, passive voice is used in writing. You don't need to ask, well, who's writing? Because we know people. If you want to specify, passive voice is used in writing by students in Jane's Grammar 50 class. If you wanted to specify that, you need to specify, because otherwise everyone will understand you just mean by people. So you don't need to say by people, because that's very obvious. If you want to specify which people, you should. But no one's going to say, do you mean passive voice is used in writing by cats? No one's going to think you mean that. All right. Let's take a look at some other reasons why we might use passive voice. So, if you are doing formal writing, so formal writing, if you are in your reading and writing class here at the ELI, if you are writing an essay for the IELTS or for the TOEFL, if you move on to a university class here in the United States, if you are describing a process or a result, it is very common to use passive voice. So here are some common verbs that you might use in this type of writing. So especially for those of you planning to enter scientific fields, these are very common. So classify, compare, develop, examine, make, measure, study, test. So here's an example. First, the information was studied, and then a recommendation was made to the boss. So a couple things to notice about this sentence. Information is not something that does a lot of action. Recommendation, it also can't do a lot of action. Second, how many of you have learned in your classes, in your writing classes, not to use I in your writing? I see a couple people. Yeah, so in formal writing, especially the higher up you go in your formal writing, For the most part, unless you receive a very specific assignment that asks you to include your opinion, you should avoid using the word I in your formal writing. So if you made this sentence as active voice would be, I studied the information and I made a recommendation to my boss. How do you remove I from that sentence? Well, this would be the information was studied by me, and then a recommendation was made to the boss by me. But putting it into passive voice is a way to remove I from your formal writing. Now, here's another reason that, and this is very common, another reason that you might use passive voice. And here, sometimes people will do this when they speak. This is either if you don't know who did an action or you don't want to say who did the action. So this is maybe you don't want to get your friend or your classmate or yourself in trouble.
It's common like speech, like politics.
Yes, it's very common in politics. Mistakes were made. Lies were told. We don't know who made those mistakes. Certainly not going to say I made them or that my political party made them. Mistakes were made. People were killed. Not going to admit who did any of this. Or, maybe your boss comes into a meeting, and if you're lucky, your boss is nice and says, oh, this report was written badly. Your boss doesn't say, you wrote the report badly. The boss just says, this report was written badly. Someone on this team wrote the report badly. We don't know who. Here we go. Mistakes were made. All right. We don't need to watch these. I'll post this to our e-learning if you wanted to watch these videos. But there are definitely some clips. You mentioned Malik, you mentioned politics. I've got some video clips of both President Bush and President Obama giving speeches where they talk about mistakes were made. And they use this phrase, and they don't say what the mistakes were, but they were the presidents who made these mistakes. And they're not saying, I made the mistake. They're just saying, oh, these mistakes happened. Mistakes were made. It's a very common political statement. Okay. Now, I said in general, we don't use passive voice in speech unless you don't want to admit you made a mistake, or if you plan to go into journalism. So if you are entering the news reporting business, so if any of you watch CNN or any other news show, you're watching the news, you may see someone reporting the news and they may use passive voice in their speech as they report the news. So obviously news reporting is not the same as normal speech. So you definitely hear passive voice in news reporting. So if any of you plan to enter that as a career, passive voice will be useful for you. So you might hear something like this: the decision of the court was announced today. All right. So again, please remember, oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so please remember though, in real life, in your interactions with people, in most of the writing that you do, in general, overall, active voice will always be a lot more common than passive voice. The exception, of course, is going to be the next 7 days in this classroom where we will focus on passive voice. So you're going to see a lot more passive voice over the next week than you will in real life
Oh.
in a 7-day period. Woo! So we're going to stop here. So this was just the introduction into passive voice. Tomorrow we're going to get into the specific forms of passive voice. So today was just an introduction as to how and why we use it. And tomorrow we'll start learning the different forms and begin practicing with it. All right? Okie dokie. Do you have any questions about passive voice thus far? Was that a yes?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I was like, hit me. Okay. All right, well, I'll see you tomorrow. Or possibly later this afternoon. Or not. Let me.
Why? Why؟ يا رجال الفريق
Yeah.
نايم.
أجل بالله كنت أكل
ها؟
عشان أكل. شنو